And we're live. Hey, Mike Julian, welcome. Thanks for coming on to have a chat.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, Mike is, I titled this one The Guru's Guru because he's sort of been in the background making us all think for about 6 years now. And I know Robb Wolf on his podcast has mentioned Mike as a massive brain and way smarter than him in a whole pile of areas. And Mike has been sort of, 6 years ago, I think you joined Optimising Nutrition Group and started correcting me about glycogen versus glucagon. I went, who is this guy? And
Yeah,
not too long after, I said, hey, do you want to come be a co-admin of the group? And back then it was just an amazing time of all these amazing people who were just, sharing papers and learning and thrashing things out. And it was like early keto days. And yeah, we learned a lot from each other. And we look back on the glory days of the hive mind and
yeah.
trying to bring it back a little bit these days. So yeah, I suppose the first question of all this is like, how the hell did you get into nutrition at such a deep level? I've just got this amazing respect for your biochem, and by day you are your day job is.
Uh, Air conditioning and heating technician. Yeah. I install them, I fix them, I do kind of everything like that. I was an auto mechanic before that.
You're basically the Will Hunting of biochemistry and nutrition. You sort of come in and everybody's arguing about everything. You just come and write the solution on the blackboard and walk away. And over the last few days, you've been having a big back and forth with Professor Richard Feynman in the group about ketosis and what it all is, and getting into the weeds. And it's like, yeah,
Yeah,
Mike's back to the old days. So yeah, it's really cool.
just
So
trying to.
how did you get an interest in all this biochem and nutrition and able to join the dots?
Um, Honestly started a long time ago. Like I've always been pretty much anything I get interested in, I get like probably obsessively interested in. Oh, I lost you. I can't hear you.
Don't know anything about that. I would never go into the
Yeah.
weeds and be a city about anything.
Yeah, so pretty much, yeah, I was like that when I was a little kid. I got way into surfing. I'm into surfboard design. And then I got a little older. I got into cars. I started rebuilding engines and doing all that stuff. It just kind of one thing, as my interest goes, I just dive way in. I got into nutrition probably in my early 20s, and it was more just like everybody else that starts working out and doing that kind of stuff. The next thing you know, like, oh, hey, if I stop eating trash, my my body responds pretty rapidly. So in doing that, it just kind of piqued my interest more and more and more. Um, I have, my father passed away very early. Had a major stroke at 56, died at 59. My mom had a stroke and relatively young in her late 50s as well. So, and then my brother is a heavy
Mm.
set guy and he developed type 2 diabetes. So for me, it was kind of like, hey, I'm interested in this stuff and I can retain the stuff I read. So I started off silly stuff like men's fitness stuff, and then it progressed from that into starting to read some books, and then it progressed from that into, hey, I'm actually reading, scientific papers and evaluating that stuff.
Mm.
And just, I don't know. I was always trying to draw the practical, like, what is this, the research, how can I actually apply it?
Mm.
So I don't know, it was just interesting. Like so here we are, what, I was 23 then, I'm 40 now. So had a lot of time to kind of work a lot of things out. And I got into the low carb stuff um, probably 15 years ago. My brother, like I said, he had a
Mm.
weight issue or whatnot. He went to a doctor here in Los Angeles, and they put him on a low carb diet. And that's the first time I ever heard anything about ketosis or any of that stuff. But it was like the magic word. It was like, oh, ketosis solves everything kind of thing. And I was like,
Yeah.
okay, that's a little, see what that
Let me
is.
dig
And
in.
my brother did it and lost like 80 pounds doing it.
Wow.
But you know, so I got like, that was my first introduction to it. And I, like a lot of other people, was like, oh, okay, well, that's simple. You drop your carbs, you go into ketosis, and that's all that matters, you know?
Yeah,
But I
yeah.
started looking at what the diet my brother was or eating. They didn't just tell you get rid of your carbs. It was a structured diet that they gave him, and it was like a 1,200 calorie diet. I was like, well,
Mm.
no wonder you're losing all that weight, you know? So I saw there the ketosis for him. It wasn't like the magic cure all, but what
Mm.
it was somewhat appetite suppressing,
Mm.
right? So it allowed him to try to go on like such a low calorie diet when you're a close to 300-pound guy. It's not easy to do. So if you
Yeah.
have the appetite suppression aspect of ketosis, it made it a little bit more tolerable
Mm.
for him. So the consistency was better. But
Yeah,
that
the
was
satiety aspect is a massive component of it all.
that's a massive component. Yeah. So, I
Mm.
mean, I can't say that low carb ketosis and all that stuff is the magic like bullet, but
Mm.
if it helps with compliance, then
Yeah.
it's a good thing to do potentially,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
So, anyways, but that's, you know, sorry for dragging it out, but
No, no, no.
coming to just a few years ago, like the social media thing, and like when I crossed paths with you, that was actually really good because it gave me access. Like I had my little bubble of people I talked to,
Yep.
and all of a sudden now I could pick the brains of some of the smartest people in the
Yeah.
field,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, at your fingertips. And it was just talking shop and like, okay, where am I wrong? And I can learn from you. And it was a really cool community thing we had going there
Yeah.
for quite some
Yeah.
time. And I think everybody that was in that little pocket at a time, because I think when I started with you, there was only like 200 people in that group.
Yeah.
Now 10,000
Yeah,
or
yeah,
something
yeah,
like
yeah.
that.
We had like Tommy Wood and Chris Kelly and Raymond Edwards and Lewis and Tyler and a whole bunch of other Ted Naiman, and now we've got a bit of a background chat going on that we all share ideas and cross check
Yeah,
each other's ideas. But yeah, it's really cool to have you guys as influences to learn from. It's just been a massive. It's just a whole lot of fun. Like it's like engineering problem solving in nutrition, but every time you find
well,
something that doesn't work, you dig a bit deeper and go, why doesn't this work? Well, how do we explain
that's
that?
the
And
that's the draw I have to it. More than
yeah,
anything, it goes back to I like to understand things. I like to figure stuff out. It's just problem solving.
yeah,
So it's particularly my interaction when I see somebody who's so sure they're right about this one aspect of things and it doesn't make sense. I'm like, maybe like I almost feel obligated to try to help them out
yeah.
because I mean,
You've got this way of asking questions that sort of draws them along the path to learn and realize things that they're not seeing at the moment from your experience and
yeah,
background.
because, well, I do that because I was that person.
Yeah,
Like I understand where they're at and like, no, you're not thinking about that right. Like
I've been there.
I
Let
know
me
that
take you on
because
the
I did that.
path.
I did the exact same thing, but here, take a step back and rethink this.
Yeah,
And it usually makes more sense. But
yeah,
that's what I
yeah.
try to do.
You must
My
have
goal is to
spent.
help. I know I end up pissing some people off, yeah, or I have, and I butt heads with certain people, but it's like my intention is really because I know other people read stuff. So if you got
Yeah,
one person out there kind of spouting nonsense and there's like a clear thing that needs to be corrected, it's like
yeah,
correct it because,
yeah.
it's not just a conversation between you and me. It's like how many
You
people
you've got
actually
ten
read
thousand
through
people
those.
reading along between you and Professor
Yeah.
Feynman, or Miranda just mentioned Frederick in the group at the moment, and those conversations we just learn. There's so many people who just watch along and listen and learn from the chat, and yeah, it's a bit of a
Yeah.
gladiatorial battle sometimes, but it's fun and cool at the same time.
Yeah, there's no hard feelings. I don't hate
Mm.
anybody in there. I mean, I'm
You
never
must
mad
have
about
spent
it.
thousands of hours just having those chats and guiding people, and definitely become
I
a
don't want to know
go-to.
how much time I spent doing that, to be honest.
Your wife could probably tell you.
Yeah, I kind of that's part of why I was backing up because I was like, hey, you know what? I have a wife and a family, and it's probably not the best use of
Yeah,
my time.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I pick my
yeah.
battles
And
now.
we were talking before you jumped on about, you know, you had your son wasn't well for a little while there, so for the last couple of years you've sort of backed off and probably coming back a little bit now. So it's really cool to see you playing again after all that.
I'm trying to
Yeah,
dip my
yeah.
toe in the waters and see how it goes.
So I think RD had a question, RD Dykeman, about, you know, you're in a lot of different groups and see a lot of different, you know, misunderstandings and diets that work and approaches that don't work. You know, what do you see that works well, and what do you see as the biggest challenges for people and misconceptions that most people come across?
Consistently, like I think, I think generally where people make the mistake is they mismatch their macronutrients to their lifestyle. So if you are somebody who's basically, most people are basically sedentary for the most part, even if you, okay, I work out for an hour a day or whatever, like, but on the whole, like if you look at your whole day, you're relatively sedentary if you're not like an elite athlete. So figuring out your carbs and your proteins and your fats and everything, it should kind of match what you're doing, right? The average person probably doesn't need 400 grams of carbohydrates. You know, they don't necessarily need to be ketogenic low, but you want to kind of, if you're not really dipping too hard into your glycogen stores, you don't really have a whole lot of glycogen to replenish. So you just kind of want to stay within that limit as far as carbohydrates go. Then your fats should pretty much make up the balance of your needs. And then depending on if you're trying to gain weight, lose weight, whatever you're trying to do, you would adjust your caloric intake kind of more so with the fat, up or down. But primarily, like as a building or a foundational thing, I always start with protein. You want adequate protein to start with. Have to start there. That's kind of the fundamental building block right there. You don't have to go sky high with it necessarily. You definitely don't want to be under. So, like, dummy rule of thumb, like, you know, a gram per pound of lean mass is like a really easy one, you know?
Mm.
So, average guy, I don't know, 150 grams for an average size male, give or take. And then everything else just kind of fills in there. So, you do the protein first, make sure you're getting protein and your micronutrients. Those are the essential things you have to have. Everything beyond that is it's
Basically
energy source.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an energy source. So if you're, you know, a really anaerobic athlete because you're just training, you're doing 2-a-days and you're doing all this kind of stuff, well, you could probably have a lot more carbs because it's just going to go, you know, right from your diet right into your glycogen stores. There's no really spillover happening. You're not going to shoot your blood sugar through the roof. But those are like a unique circumstance. You know, not everybody is an elite athlete doing crazy workloads like that.
Yeah.
So kind of pull it down.
Dial the carbohydrates back to the amount you
Dial
actually
the carbohydrates,
need for the activity
like
you're doing.
the average person, like you don't have, like I said, you don't have to be like 20, 30 grams ketosis all the time. But like realistically speaking, like most people, probably like 75 grams to 120, like in that range, it's still basically considered low carb.
Yeah.
But it's not like bottoming out low carb, you know. Gives you some dietary flexibility, it makes it pretty easy to stick to. You know, that's kind of where I start people.
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges I think in keto compared to the low carb and all the other approaches the low carb approaches that have gone before Atkins, Bernstein, you know, Banting or whatever, the whole keto thing has been afraid of insulin and hence protein, and therefore keep carbohydrates as low as possible. And I think that's a lot of the time where they come unstuck and go wrong, is because when you try to minimize the protein, satiety goes out the window, and you're eating, you know, majority fat, and which is low satiety, and then they go, well, why am I not losing weight? So I think we've come to a point where we're starting to understand better that it's not, you know, lower carb doesn't just switch off your insulin like you're a type 1 diabetic unmedicated, and you don't want to be there.
Yeah. Well, you don't have to, like Well, like how it kind of or evolved like in pop culture, right? You had like low carb was popular, and then low
Yeah,
carb became, well, I'm stalling, so well,
yeah,
there's carbs in the nuts I was eating, so like they got lower and lower and lower, and then ultimately it turned into keto.
yeah,
And then if you keep following the trend, it gets into carnivore. Like
yeah,
it's like, okay, how low can you go? It's not, you don't need to go that crazy with it. And
yeah.
then the thing with the protein, like when keto came in, protein, all of a sudden they started sort of demonizing protein because if you have more than a set amount of protein, it lowers your ketones,
Mm.
right? So I
Yeah,
think I
yeah,
think when people started doing the ketone meter things or
yeah,
the checking their blood and all that, I think that
yeah, yeah.
was going backwards hard because if you don't
I think we
understand
all
what
went
you're,
through that phase of trying to track the ketones, and more ketones are better, and you got to drink the bulletproof
yeah,
coffee, and more fat, and then I'll be losing weight because my ketones are so high, and yeah, well, I
yeah,
was
it became,
definitely there.
it gave you access to a metric that most people don't understand the dynamics of. So it just kind of became, well, I'm not in ketosis, I'm messing it up. But the thing is like the way ketosis works, ketosis happens when you're in a low carb situation.
Mm,
Ketosis happens because your liver is in high gear as far as gluconeogenesis goes. And the precursor that allows what ultimately going into the TCA cycle, you have acetyl-CoA, which is your energy molecule or coming in from your fat or whatever. You need oxaloacetate to enter the TCA cycle. It condenses the two and then it lets it go in. But when you're in a low carb setting, you're not taking in glucose. Your body's trying to make it. Oxaloacetate in the liver gets taken away from the TCA cycle and goes towards gluconeogenesis. So if you're losing oxaloacetate to fuel gluconeogenesis, now the fat or whatever your body is trying to burn can't enter the TCA cycle, so it gets spit off into ketones. Or it goes down the ketogenesis pathway. And the whole point of that is the incoming energy, so if your liver can't utilize the energy coming in, it wants to avoid energy toxicity as well, just like any other tissues. So turning it into ketones and then kicking it out to the periphery is the liver trying to defend itself from a flood of energy, right? So because the peripheral tissues can use it.
mm,
But the problem with where the protein thing came about is if you eat more protein, say you're on a low carb diet, keto diet, and you just say, you know what, I'm going to eat another 10, 50 grams, whatever, of protein, you'll find your ketones go down because the protein gives you precursors to make
mm,
oxaloacetate. And
mm,
now all of a sudden that incoming acetyl-CoA that was going off to ketogenesis can just run through the TCA cycle
mm.
and be used for energy. So there's
Yeah.
no reason to kick it out as ketones because the liver is actually working better essentially in
Yeah,
that
it's
way.
working efficiently, and working in the
Yeah.
TCA cycle or the Krebs cycle is more efficient. And even the Eskimos, after a while, they get to a point where they go, you know, we're going to modulate to have a lower ketone level, even though they're on a very very low carbohydrate diet
Yeah.
most of the time.
If you go low carb to the point where you're in ketosis, like really deep ketosis, you're kind of in an energy conservation state, right? A little bit. And then if you add protein back in, you're actually allowing your body to use more fuel efficiently because
Mm.
you can't well, you can't burn the fat that you're beta oxidation or going through beta oxidation. You can't burn it in the TCA cycle. So you have a secondary way to kick it off as ketones. And then that goes out to the periphery and you're using it. But anyway,
Yeah,
sorry.
so the ketosis is basically an emergency backup system when you don't have enough carbohydrate and protein in your diet to be able to burn fat, because you can't burn it in the TCA cycle because you don't have enough oxaloacetate from protein or carbohydrate.
Yeah.
And that's something you sort of taught me a while ago, and it's a key part of the book to try and explain that there's nothing, you can still burn fat without ketosis. I think that's what most people think. I need ketosis to be burning body fat, and
Yeah.
then the
Well, and
logic just
and
falls apart from there.
And the thing with the ketones, when they go out into the periphery, because you get that extra energy coming into those cells, you get into it's a physiological insulin resistance. So what is actually happening is, because you have a limited supply of glucose in the diet, so your brain, some of your organs still need a certain amount of glucose, like your blood cells do, your brain does to a degree. So the ketones act as a supplemental fuel. But what they do in the peripheral tissues is they make you somewhat insulin resistant, so that it's a glucose sparing state to try to. So if your muscles are just soaking up all the glucose, then you might run low for the critical organs that need it. Right. So I don't think, like, if you're trying to lose weight, I don't think you want to go hard into ketosis. It's kind of cool to flirt with it and be in the low ranges of it, but I don't think you want to go hard into it, because you kind of do introduce, or if you're diabetic or anything else, you're kind of, you can make the matters a little bit worse as far as your glucose disposal and stuff goes. If that makes sense.
By becoming insulin resistant, by pushing the ketosis too hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what happens, a lot of people find after, we're all chasing ketones for a number of months, and then all of a sudden you say, well, my ketones are going down, and what's gone wrong? Have I stuffed up my diet? I'm still eating ketogenic. Why aren't my ketones high? What's sort of happening there that you talk to Lewis and all these people who are metabolically amazingly fit and still eating a ketogenic diet? Why do the ketones disappear over time? It seems the excess energy we talked about energy toxicity and total energy from glucose, fat, and carbs in the bloodstream, and ketones as well. And as you lose weight, you seem to lose that excess energy that's floating around in your bloodstream.
Yeah. God, I haven't thought about this in a long time. Sorry. I used to just be able to rattle it off, or I had my theories on it. I think as you become acclimated to being ketogenic, I think over time you do tend to kick out, because when lipolysis happens in your adipose, if you break away you have a triglyceride. So if you break away three fatty acids, you have a glycerol, right? Two glycerols together will make, when it goes through your circulation, hits your liver, and it'll make a glucose. So I think you kind of maybe hit a situation where you're getting your lipolysis is ramped up, right? And you're now starting to supplement substrate to your liver that'll actually bring up enough glucose to help balance out that TCA cycle situation we're having, or we were just talking about, right? That, and guys like Louis and all of them, they're not shy of protein, right? So they're not trying to, keep the low or the higher ketosis, which requires that you restrict protein. They're not doing that. They're trying to stay fit. They're trying to keep their muscle mass, doing all that. So they're going to be a little higher. So you might see that, like, they're just in the low ranges. And I remember there was the Dr. Finney did a paper, or when they were the Verta thing, they found that the ketones gradually went down over time. I remember you bringing that up. Yeah,
it sort of goes from 0.3 to 0.6 after 6 weeks or so, and then it just continually goes down, and after a year they're back to pretty much 0.4, and 2 years they're at 0.4, and at 3 years they don't report it because they don't want to, they're all about ketosis, and ketones disappeared even on a ketogenic diet. So yeah, and I think they were thinking that people were not being compliant and whatnot. I mean, it's possible because nobody was really doing long-term study, or nobody's really followed for like years and years and years of people being on these diets. It's like, it's possible you just adapt over time to it. You find more of a homeostatic situation where you don't have the high ketones and all that. Or you eat a little bit more protein over time because that's what the body craves. And I suppose over time we tend to gravitate, which we always talk about, we gravitate back to that fat and carb combo that eliminates all ketosis and makes us all fat. So you definitely want to avoid that.
The happy foods,
Yeah, I think that happy foods.
Yeah.
Dylan Farr posted a photo of I don't know if you saw it, the crow dipping the chicken McNugget in the sauce on the curb. It's
Hmm.
unreal. Like even birds in nature work out how to get that hyper palatable hit to fatten up, and we just do the same thing and keep doing it.
Oh yeah.
So one of the things that I think you brought into a lot of our consciousness was the personal fat threshold from Roy Taylor, and just
Mm.
sort of helped us to understand that carbs, glucose, and fat are very much interrelated, and the energy toxicity. Do you want to just unpack your understanding of that and how it's central to our understanding of diabetes and health?
Yeah. So it kind of goes that in order for glucose to properly be utilized, you have substrates in the bloodstream that are competitive, right? So if you have a lot of fatty acids flowing through the system, it makes it dulls your sensitivity to glucose disposal or insulin, and it makes it harder to dispose of glucose, right? So, and that's kind of the problem when you see somebody who's over the years gotten heavier and heavier, and then they develop insulin resistance and everything else. Part of it, we see the blood sugar stuff because it's easy to track, but if you look at the fatty acid clearance and whatnot, it's very, very lazy. And it's actually the poor fatty acid clearance that's impacting the glucose clearance. So insulin, when you eat a carbohydrate and your insulin goes up, people think, oh, insulin shoves glucose into your cells. And insulin, the way I look at it, is insulin is permissive of that. It doesn't force it. I mean, it can in really high doses, but it doesn't. What it has to do, what its primary role is to kind of vacate the bloodstream of fatty acids, because then it allows easy entrance or easy disposal of glucose, if that makes sense. But the
Yeah,
personal
yeah.
fat
So
threshold situation,
when you've got high glucose, really what the insulin is doing is stopping the lipolysis, which is the release of fat from storage, so that the glucose can be used up, and it sort of gets the fat fuel out of the way, so it can be
exactly.
assimilated into the cells and be used. So you always talk about insulin raising proportional to the ability of the body to store that energy source, which is really fascinating. So over the longer term, the body loves to store fat, so it doesn't raise insulin that much too quickly.
Yeah. A healthy adipose or healthy fat tissue is a buffer for energy flux. So if you
Mm.
eat a big, really high calorie meal, a lot of fat or this or that, all of that ultimately enters your bloodstream. And if you have adipose that'll readily suck it up, the rest of your lean tissues don't get the shock of too much energy,
Mm.
right? So if you have, as you get heavier, or your personal fat threshold, the whole point of that is everyone has a healthy range of a weight gain that they can
Mm.
handle. It's genetic. I don't know,
Mm.
but what it is the number of adipocytes that you have, the individual fat cells. We all kind of have a set amount. If you gain weight, they'll expand in size, individual size. If they expand to a
Mm.
certain point, ideally, new little ones will pop up, right? To kind of bail out, offload some of the work from the other ones. So you'll get bigger, 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 but you'll hit a certain point, or everybody does, and it could be as little as 20 pounds of extra weight on you, and it could be like my so-called lifestyle or, you
Mm.
know, my 600-pound life or whatever. But like you could be one of those people that get so big that you get like stuck in your house because you never hit it.
Mm.
Those
And,
people
and
that get,
those people remain insulin sensitive for a very long time, and
yeah, because they're fat,
then the
they're
fat gets full and
adipose.
overflows.
Their adipose, or everybody's adipose, is a protective mechanism. So if you're one of those people who can just expand and expand and expand, you might have to be cut out of your house because you
Mm.
can't fit through the door anymore, but you're probably not diabetic. Like those people pretty much never are,
Yeah.
right? But if you're unfortunate and you're one of those people who goes from really lean and you put on 20 pounds, then all of a sudden you start getting insulin resistant, it's because you don't have the ability to add adipocytes like some of those other people do. So what happens is once your adipocytes as they enlarge, they become insulin resistant themselves, right? And what happens is in order to get them to function, your insulin level starts going up and up and up. So your baseline insulin level will track pretty much with your body composition. As you get heavier, it'll creep up, because your body just wants to. The goal of your pancreas is it's like a fuel sensor. So it monitors the blood glucose in your bloodstream, and it keeps track of the fatty acid concentrations in your bloodstream, and it'll dose insulin based on that to try to keep it at a pretty stable level. And the more insulin resistant you get, the more insulin is required to maintain that homeostasis.
And when you stop eating and fast for a period or whatever, your insulin levels drop and basically release energy into the bloodstream. And I always thought, if you go low carb, you'll reduce your insulin, and all your stored energy will leach out into your blood like a type 1 diabetic. But it doesn't really happen that way. Because when I look at my wife's Moni's insulin every day, you realize that 80% of her insulin that she requires is just basal insulin that she requires whether she eats or not, just to stop a whole body disintegrating into the bloodstream.
Just to keep that homeostasis, that happy medium between not too much blood glucose and not too little. It's like right in the middle. The same thing with your fatty acids.
So
your body wants just a steady, stable flow.
Yeah, the way to manage your insulin levels is really just to find a way to eat that creates satiety and you're not hungry all the time, so that body fat level can come down. And that's the way to manage insulin resistance, insulin toxicity, which is really a function of energy toxicity.
Yeah, 100%. Exactly.
Yeah,
that's exactly what it is.
I really thank you for helping me, drumming it in over and over and over to the point that I really finally understood it over the years. It's really been good. So did you want to touch any more on ketosis and how it actually works and what the big misunderstandings and arguments are? Is it we all need ketosis by any means possible, like we were all buying the ketone supplements to get high ketones?
Oh yeah, that was kind of a train wreck phase, I think. I like in sports performance, so like elite sports performance, they make sense, right? And if you'll even notice, I forget the name of the woman now, Louise Brooks.
No, yeah,
I think it's Louise Brooks, I believe.
Yeah.
Anyways, she's a sports scientist or whatnot, but they were doing ketone esters and stuff like that for endurance athletes. But what they were also doing is they were simultaneously not just doing, if they just did the ketones by themselves, it didn't really have a strong ergogenic effect. They were doing ketones with glucose. You needed the two together to really get the bang for the buck. And I don't really remember why the reasoning behind it was. I think it was just that because they're competing fuels, it would help restore glycogen with the glucose as you're burning the ketones, and then once the ketones kind of burned out, you had all this glucose to go. So it extended your endurance. But I don't know, it was a few years ago I was looking at that stuff. But as far as the recreational, like Prove It and all that stuff that was on the market, that was a train wreck, I think.
Yeah.
Because it was just like pounding energy into the system that didn't need it.
That sort of makes sense if you're a Tour de France athlete on the starting line wanting to fill every possible fuel tank up with energy so you can blast as fast as you could. But if you're trying to lose weight, then filling, you could theoretically fill your alcohol, ketone, glucose and fat fuel tank all at the same time and basically overload the system with fuel. But that's the opposite of what you want if you're trying to lose weight and gain metabolic health.
And the other thing with ketones is if you're exogenously taking ketones, they have oxidative priority over fuels. So if you're fasting and you're trying to just lose weight, or you're just eating a low cal diet or low carb, low cal, whatever, trying to do that, if you're constantly chugging ketones, you're constantly stopping lipolysis because the ketones, like when I fast or anybody who's not type 1 diabetic, you take food away, you go into ketosis, is what happens. But the reason your ketones go sky high like a type 1 would if they took away their insulin is because there's a feedback loop. So the ketones get up to a certain point and then they start to inhibit lipolysis directly, right? And by slowing down the release of fatty acids out of the adipose, they slow down the fatty acids getting to the liver so that it slows down the ketogenic process. It kind of keeps you down at a comfortable level. Yeah. So if you're trying to lose weight and all of a sudden you're just chugging those things like crazy, you're shooting yourself in the foot. Yeah. It's counterproductive, like no other.
So the more ketones you're eating, the more your insulin is rising to suppress lipolysis and the release of energy from your stored fat. Yeah, so you can burn off the ketones first.
Yeah, and ketones will directly inhibit lipolysis, not even necessarily with insulin. They use the nicotinic acid receptor to slow, so they're self-regulating, and they regulate themselves by controlling lipolysis. That's how it works. So it's not, I don't know, it was a weird fad. That's all I can say. But it was a fad that was fed by the ketone meters. Like when the ketone meters came out and like you could kind of, biohack and figure your stuff out, if you didn't know what you're looking at, and it's like, well, I want high ketones because I'm in a ketogenic diet. Your best interests are going out the window unknowingly.
Yeah, misdirected priorities. Basically, if ketones are the holy grail and my number one priority, then I'll do anything I can. Chug the buttered coffee, drink all the expensive ketones. Esters might be better to get ketones higher, but you look at the people who kept on taking them, they weren't necessarily the most metabolically healthy people after just loading up with more and more. And anyway, had a bit of fun trying them, but got my ketones high. I think I was shooting some photos to you when somebody sent me some esters to try, and anyway,
it was fun. We all played with this stuff, but it was
got the nerd out.
For me, it was just to for me, it was much more like, oh, if I do this, what happens?
Yeah,
I was just curious. I wasn't trying to do anything with it.
Yeah, so there's still plenty of confusion and argument over whether fat calories matter and whether insulin. Someone said on Facebook the other day that you just eat the butter and your insulin and blood sugars don't rise, and therefore they're basically free food. So prioritize fat, avoid carbs, avoid protein. How do you explain to someone who's got that logic that maybe they should move on if they want to optimize their metabolic health?
If you look at where dietary fat, all dietary fat, where it goes, its normal just path, the circuit that it runs, goes from your GI tract, goes into chylomicrons, goes from chylomicrons directly to your fat tissue. That's the first place it goes. It will hit the tissues in circulation on the way, and some of it will get used for energy, but the bulk of dietary fat goes directly to your adipose first. The reason it does that is because your body can much more tightly control the release of fatty acids out of your adipose than it can the surges of dietary fat. Right? That makes sense. If your body wants stable energy all the time, it doesn't make any sense to just, hey, I eat fat and I'm just going to burn that fat. Because it's going to be these huge pulses of fat. So, and the same thing with glucose. Ideally, it'll go into your bloodstream and then it goes right into your liver or in your muscles. Ideally, it goes into glycogen. Then it's metered back out from there. So, of course, dietary fat counts. Like if you're trying to lose weight and you're only, the circuit that it runs, so out of adipose, free fatty acids are released. They're non-esterified fatty acids. They're attached to albumin. They'll run through your circulation because it's the water-soluble, or the protein. Albumin helps carry it. It goes all the way around your peripheral tissues, and anything that needs it will take it. But whatever doesn't get used goes to your liver, and then is repackaged into low-density lipoprotein and sent back out. The whole point is to send it back to adipose. So it's a continuous circuit going through from adipose into the circulation to your liver and then back to adipose. It's just a loop. But and your dietary fat goes directly to your adipose. But if you're only burning, I don't know, 2,500 calories a day, you're eating 3,000 calories worth of fat, the net effect, you're going to get fat. Like, that's what happens. It's supposed to happen.
Yeah.
And it's weird.
Your body loves to store any excess.
Yeah, I don't know. It's weird to think that if you're insulin low, you're just going to burn it all, or you're just going to lose weight. Like, irrespective of calories.
Why do people, to play devil's advocate, why do people tend to lose weight and their appetite improves when they go a bit, they drop their carbs somewhat when they start a low carb diet? Why is that stage magic? What's actually happening?
I think what most people do when you first, if you're never done a low carb diet before and you just had whatever regular standard American style diet and you go low carb, what you're inadvertently gonna do, because all of the processed foods are out the window, right? So it's you're ditching the carbs, but simultaneously you're ditching a lot of the fat out of your diet that you used to eat, like the donuts and just everything. Pizza's gone, like all that stuff's gone. So you kind of unintentionally will cut calories at the same time. And a lot of people, if they, blood sugar spikes and all that kind of stuff, like you go, like people get hangry or anything when they're having like the carb diet or regular diet, carb diet. So it stabilizes your mood. But it's more than anything, I think, for people, it's a really easy guideline to cut a lot of crap out of your diet. Like if you tell somebody like, oh, you're going to go on a low fat diet, like it's actually really hard to eat a low fat diet for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Or you're going to go vegan.
Not many people actually manage to stay really low fat, high carb. They sort of gravitate back into the middle.
Everybody kind of migrates right back to the middle. Yeah.
You need that religious zealotry of, all oils are bad and, whole food plant-based, but not many people are living at that extreme.
Yeah. But just as
you definitely, when you drop carbs, you generally gravitate to more protein. I think that's where a lot of the magic happens.
That's a huge aspect of it too.
They'll tend to eat more protein and therefore get more satiety and go, low carb is magic and it's helping. I'm never hungry, but it's potentially because you're increasing the protein in your diet.
That's a huge part of it. And protein is an inefficient energy source. So it kind of lets you eat slightly higher calories technically because it's not such a easy fuel source. Yeah. So yeah, it does allow you to maintain some food volume that way as well. But I think the worst thing that happened to low carb, to be perfectly honest with you, was when it became low carb high fat. When that acronym came around, that was the worst thing that happened. Because I did low carb before, and then I kind of bought into the high fat thing too, because it was like, oh God, all these like very well credentialed people are espousing it and this and that. There's got to be something to it. It can't be that, So, but as soon as the fat's a free food thing came in, I think it sabotaged so many people.
And then it went from low carb, high fat to keto. You just keep progressing down.
It was the natural progression. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So now there's some guy named Ted Naiman, rebelling at the other extreme. He dropped a question of why is the PE diet the best? But I sort of wanted to throw that on its head and be devil's advocate, because we were chatting about, when is too much protein? When do you reach a ceiling of how much protein you can practically have? We were chatting with Simon, I think yesterday, about you get to a point where you can only eat so much protein and your performance and your mood and hunger suffer, and you just start craving the donuts and pizza at that point. So where's a reasonable ceiling, and how do you know you've reached it?
Well, I think to Ted's credit, I think Ted's got a really good thing going, because like from the practical application standpoint, like he deals
it's deadly simple.
Yeah, then that's the win, and I think that's where low carb originally, goes back forever, but I think the simplicity of the message was huge. Really, really huge to compliance. Because you're taking people who, like most people, they get hungry and they eat. Like that's about
Yep.
as deep as they get into nutrition.
Yep.
You know,
Totally.
it tastes good and I'm not hungry anymore. I'm done.
Yeah. I'm
You
moving
know,
on.
so like, yeah, if you give them these like, you know, a long list of you got to do this, don't do this, don't do that, it loses them. So where Ted's got it right, it's like base your diet on protein and green veggies and whatnot, and then everything else is energy. And then depending on your contacts, you just kind of go from there. Whether that's going to be, you know, if you just want to stay weight stable, maybe you can have more carbs or more fats or this or that. Like as long as you're not eating too much, like that's the way to go. As far as I think what we were talking about with Simon and whatnot, I think people mischaracterize what Ted is trying to say, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes. If we recall, not to call anybody out, but there was a living low carb guy. He did Ted's sort of P to E thing, but he did it as carnivore. And he totally goofed it because where Ted's thing, like the P to E, is like, oh, well, get your protein up to like 40%, 30%, 50%, or whatever. The idea is not to raise your protein through the roof on your existing calories. So if you're eating 3,000 calories a day and you're raising it to get your 30, 50%, it's an astronomical amount of protein. That's not what you're trying to do. What you're trying to do is eat your normal amount of protein, say that's 150 grams a day or something like that. And you're to get the ratio right, you're trying to bring down all the fats and carbs. Right. So it's only 40% of a calorie restricted diet or 30%. Like that, I think that's where people get it a little goofy. But I know I know what Ted means, and that's because I've talked to him about it or discussed it with him. It's like we're on the same page. But it doesn't mean 400 grams of protein. Or 200 or 300 or whatever. I mean, it's you're changing the energy, not the protein.
It's not necessarily about more protein, although Ted says you may end up eating a little bit more protein, but it's about bringing back the fat and the carbs. So that's you end up dialing back the donut and the pizza and every other hyperpalatable food that anything in nature will overeat if it's got it available. So if you say, you know, I'm going to prioritize my protein and try to, then I'm probably not going to be hungry for the donuts at the end of the day. And
you raise if you make the protein your focus, like that's the cornerstone of your diet, it will displace a lot of the crap. Right? Like that's the idea. So like you're not, if you're avoiding protein, then you're going to be filling it up with carbs and fats. And it's really easy to shoot your calories through the roof that way.
And you definitely get to a point where you you know, we were talking about the 4.4 grams per kilo protein, which is a massive amount in the Antonio study, and you had all these dropouts and people just couldn't live on protein alone because your body just goes, I can't make ATP from all this protein, it's too much, and you feel sluggish and your body's just craving
a miserable existence. I
energy.
tried it. I tried it years and years ago when I was trying to bodybuild and stuff, and it was like, oh, protein's muscles and this and that, and I was sky high, and I actually went backwards because I got to a point where I displaced so much of the energy nutrient or calorie, like carbs and fats, because I was just chugging protein shakes and whatnot. I just felt like crap. I didn't have enough energy to train well, and it was actually by pulling my protein back a little bit and adding in a little bit more carbs and fats or whatnot that I actually felt way better, could train harder, and it worked. But
and Ted's refined his message to say it's not about, you know, everybody hitting 50%. It's about, okay, you're at 15, let's try 20, and once your weight loss stalls, let's try 25, and then maybe 30, and if you can get to 40, then you're home free and you're going to have a lot easier weight loss results.
No, it definitely works. That's the way to go. If you like, for just keeping it super simple, if you focus on protein and you like green veggies and fibrous vegetables or whatnot, that's the easiest way to drop weight. 100%.
And we definitely see that, you know, the nutrient density always aligns with protein, but it's not just about protein. If you focus on, you can just overdo the protein to the point that you're not getting the nutrient density that you need. So focus on adequate nutrients in your food, you're going to be doing a lot better as well. So that's sort of the next level that we overly complexify it to make it a bit more interesting and challenging.
100%.
You're hiding out in your garage from the family there. So lipidology, everybody gets really excited about lipids and cholesterol and blood tests, and I just glaze over because it's not my thing. I'm the glucose guy, and I don't understand it to the level that you do, but you get on there and debate with anybody who will listen and have some fascinating discussions. What's the practical, I don't think everybody needs to go to that level of detail, but what's the practical take home that people need to know about their blood lipids, their cholesterol, their all those details? What would you just say what you need to worry about?
I mean, I think they're not something to be ignored. I think I get a little annoyed when you see, like, particularly in the low carb community, you'll see people who, their cholesterol goes wacky. Like, and like, if it goes up a little bit, it's like, oh, well, it makes sense. So if you go back to what I was talking about, when lipolysis is ramped up, you're releasing more fatty acids into the bloodstream, and you're going to burn what you can burn, and whatever you don't burn goes to the liver. It gets packed up as LDL, and then it goes back. So if you go from having really high carb diet where you're not really burning any fat at all, and all of a sudden you're going to a low carb diet and you're circulating way more fatty acids, your cholesterol will go up a little bit. That's not unusual. So if it's within reason, I wouldn't worry about it. But like, some people, they get sky high stuff going on, and I get a little frustrated because I think there's like kind of something going on in the community where they sort of downplay it as not a big deal, or, oh, it's normal, you're on a low carb diet. And I don't think that's, I feel like it's a little reckless to go there, to be perfectly honest. I'm not a doctor,
not sure
so I'm
whether
like,
that's normal or healthy, and you don't want to celebrate. It's like high ketones, you don't necessarily want to celebrate sky high fatty acids.
but well, you'll see that. That's the problem is, if you follow enough social media, you've seen it, I'm sure. You'll see somebody like, oh, like their cholesterol is like in the 500s or 600s, like it's through the roof, and their doctor is genuinely concerned because under, like, if you're eating a normal diet under normal circumstances, and a doctor sees that's what they're assuming you're eating, just standard American diet or whatever. They see that's super alarming, because it tells them that you're way insulin resistant or something funky is going on. So, but what I see sometimes, it drives me mad, is somebody will come in, they're an otherwise healthy person, that they've been on keto, they get these sky high numbers, and it's like, oh, I guess it's time to find a new doctor. And it's like, no, probably not. Maybe talk to them. Maybe try to work it out. Like, they have your best interest. They really do.
Yeah.
Typically, But what happens is, these people will see online a community of people who are having elevated lipids, and for some reason they kind of chalk it up as like, oh, it's normal. Like, the medical establishment just doesn't understand it yet. And that might be true, but I'm uncomfortable saying that's true. So I think to me, I would be concerned,
So
and
if
it's
you're eating
easy
more fat rather than carb, you're going to have more elevated blood lipids, but to the point that, you don't want high ketones, high glucose, high fatty acids, especially all at the same time. So if you got the fatty acids through the roof, then maybe you do have some level of energy toxicity that you don't want to celebrate and ignore completely.
Well, and the thing is, though, if you take those people who have that real reaction where it just goes through the roof, if you take those people, you can either, if you increase their protein, because they're always on keto when you see this, they're like keto, moderate protein, high fat kind of situation. A lot of them are super active and they're relatively fit looking. But if you take that same person and you just add in 50 more grams of protein, or take them from the 20 or 30 grams of carbs that they're taking, and maybe up it to 75 to 100,
Mm.
their lipids totally normalized,
Yeah.
right? Like for the most part.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, well, if you can normalize it just by eating, 50 more grams of protein or maybe 50 grams of carbs, until I know that the, sky high numbers are not a problem, I would much rather just do that.
Mm.
It's an easy fix. It's not hard to
Yeah.
fix. I
And with
mean,
that little bit more
it's an
protein, a little bit
interesting.
more carbs, you can get a bit more nutrient density, and it looks like a healthier diet potentially.
Well, exactly. I mean, you could see that for sure doing what you do.
Mm.
I mean,
Mm.
and it just from the monotony. Like, I mean, if you've done super keto for like real
Mm.
carb,
Mm.
to go from 20 grams of carbs, 30 grams of carbs, or whatever, up to closer to 100. I mean, a lot more food options are on the table.
Mm. Mm.
It's not as monotonous.
Yeah.
So some people I think it's better all around, but it just depends.
Including potentially a lot more nutrition in that approach.
Hmm.
So to bring it together, like you know, what advice would you give someone starting out on trying to improve their health, trying to reverse diabetes, manage blood sugar, lose body fat? What are the top 2 or 3 tips you'd give somebody?
The number one would be you don't have to do everything at once. Like absolutely, like make small
Mm.
goals,
Mm.
small attainable goals. Like if it's the first goal is, hey, you know what? I'm not going to drink soda anymore. I'm just going to drink tea or water or coffee,
Yeah.
and that's it. You didn't change your diet. You just got rid of soda.
Yeah.
That's a good one. Start
Yeah.
there. Do little
Get one
goals.
thing in place, move on to the next one.
Get one thing in place because I mean I've done it. Everybody, you've probably done it too. You're like, oh, you know what? I'm out of shape. I'm gonna get it together. You go hog wild, like super, super strict on your diet. You start hitting the gym like crazy. You're so sore. You can't even move for 2 weeks. And then like
Yeah.
you just burn yourself out if you do it that way. So I
Mm.
think like little things like that. But as far as the diet, ultimately, keeping it simple, simple,
Mm.
kind of, I like what Ted does with the PDE thing. Like it really, it just trims out all the junk.
Mm.
So just kind of focus on protein and veggies, start there, and then you kind of add in your calories
Mm.
depending on what your goals are with
Yeah.
either carbs or fats. You
Yeah.
just build it up.
So when would you go for carbs versus fats?
What's that?
When would you go with carbs versus fat, depending on your activity? And if you're like really active, then you might need a few more
I'm
carbs. But
so
if
I
you're more sedentary, you go for the fat.
I'm kind of I'm biased towards low carb diets. That's like what I'm most comfortable with. So I always kind of gravitate that way. I
Mm.
know you could do a low fat diet that's a high carb diet and probably make it work for certain people.
Mm.
But I think it's just easier and more. I don't know. It seems to make more sense to do
Mm.
pull the carbs down. They don't have to plummet like down.
Mm.
They don't have to be nothing, but definitely step back and try to, and then make the balance fat. So high
Mm.
protein, the balance of your calories, depending on what your target is going to be fat, and then your carbs are relatively low. The
Yeah.
carbs, like, I try to think of carbs as more of a supplement, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah.
Right? Like there is there's no such thing as an essential carbohydrate kind of mindset that goes around in the low carb stuff. It's true, but it depends on what you're doing. If, like I
Mm.
said, if you're basically sedentary, you probably don't need a lot of carbohydrates,
Mm. Mm.
right? But if you are weightlifting and you're running and you're doing like you're training for a sport, like when we used to play football when I was younger. I mean, we used to have
Mm.
we used to have Hell Week, and it was 2-a-days, and it would be like weights in the morning, and then it would be weights and you know calisthenics or just everything, sprints,
Mm.
total
Mm.
conditioning stuff in the morning,
Mm.
and then in the afternoon or evening you would scrimmage and play 2 hours of football basically,
Yeah. Wow.
do drills and everything. But it was 2-a-days. Like in those kind of situations, you could probably have some carbs between your first practice and your second practice, and it'd probably be to your benefit because you can't, if you wax your glycogen levels in the first training session,
Mm.
your gluconeogenesis can only replenish glycogen. So
Yeah.
it will replenish it. Like if you wait,
But
give it a couple
it's
days,
rate limited.
it's rate limited. Exactly. So in those kind of unique situations, you know, having carbs for lunch before your evening practice, it'd probably be to your benefit because you'll help restock your glycogen a little bit. But
Yeah,
those
in
are
terms of
unusual circumstances.
yeah, in terms of nutrient density, we always seem to see, you know, protein corresponds with nutrient density, which comes with some fat, and then, you know, a little, you know, the lower in carbs, maybe less than 20 or 30% carbs in your diet, definitely aligns with better nutrient density as well. But you don't need
Absolutely,
to,
yeah.
unless your blood sugars are on a massive roller coaster, you don't need to dial it down further to get satiety or nutrient density effects. You just need to
Yeah.
make sure you've got that cornerstone of protein in your diet, and then go from there and dial it in based on
Yeah.
how you feel and your goals and your blood sugars.
Most protein foods, like naturally occurring foods, they're very well complemented with fat anyways.
Mm.
So you don't have to go for like the fattiest cuts and everything else. Like a relatively lean steak is going to be basically 1-to-1 ratio between protein and fat by calories. So that's why the low carb's easy, because if you just focus on the protein, as long as you're eating whole food proteins, you're not just like all your protein comes from a protein powder. You know, you're already basically going to get plenty of fat. You don't have to like, you know. So the calories, I mean, they're the carbs. You just kind of you play with those a bit. That's what historically, that's what I do. Right now I'm in the post-children, a little fuckier than I want to be kind of thing. Dad mode. I'm
Dad bod
trying.
mode.
I'm a little bit dad bod right now, admittedly. But I've been trying recently. Well, I've been getting back into surfing more, which has been great. And I feel goofy. Like I bought it's like a surf skate, like it's called a Carver surf skateboard.
Oh, cool.
I bought one of those, and it looks funny because I'm a 40-year-old dude out in my front lawn or front yard riding around the skateboard, but it like mimics surfing, so it's fun. For me, it's a fun way to do cardio.
Yeah.
Because I don't like to run, and like I need. Well, that's what like surfing I enjoy because I like to surf. So the exercise is a side effect of just doing something you like to do. I much rather do that kind of stuff. But anyways,
that's cool.
Sorry.
Yeah. So where do you see nutrition going in over the next 5 or 10 years? Where would you like it to go? And I suppose we've talked about social media, and it's a bit of a crazy world where the crazy trends seem to take off, and everybody lives in their little social bubble, and they're with their own media feed, and it's a bit of a weird world. Where do you see it going, and where would you like to see it go, and how do we fine tune it to get to where it should go rather than where it probably will?
I'd like to see less zealotry overall, and for everyone to kind of realize like there is a common goal with nutrition, you know, like the nutrition scientists and everything, or even like the ones that put out like the dietary guidelines that everybody in the low carb communities particularly like attacks. Like they all have the best of intentions. I don't think it's you know, they're not the enemy. They're seeing things different. What I think the research scientists have done over the years is I think they've really done a good job of identifying what's wrong, like metabolically. And I think where some of these trends kind of come through and everything is because the messaging from the nutrition orthodoxy, I don't think they have good practical solutions.
Yeah.
So they figured out what's wrong, but they don't really give you a good guide as like how to address it.
And they're spending hundreds of millions of dollars testing, you know, extreme low fat versus extreme low carb, and it's like, well, wait up. How does somebody move? Nobody's going to eat that way. How do we move it forward in a practical way that'll help people actually, from where they're at now, take the next step?
Well, and even like the standard, like the dietary guidelines that, you know, everybody criticizes, it's like, well, first off, nobody eats that way.
Nobody's following them already.
Nobody's following them, right? So they're not necessarily bad, but nobody's doing it to begin with. So they need to figure out how to they don't communicate well. Like that's basically what it boils down to.
Mm.
And then everybody, it's, the social media phenomenon is just kind of weird because you've seen it. I mean, we saw it for sure, like in the nutrition sphere. It like got really culty, and then you had like different groups would like battle different groups, and then they would send their like little warriors over to like, oh, this person's saying this, and it's like it got really bizarre. We
Yeah.
saw that nutrition, and it was
Yeah.
just in keto groups because God forbid, you know, we were talking about keto, and I said, hey, you know what, dietary fat actually adds up, it matters. And then
Yeah.
somebody took a screenshot of me and put it in another group, and I was like, you know, get the pitchforks out. I was the enemy. So
Mike's a
it's weird.
heretic.
Yeah, it was really weird. But that was in the nutrition world. And then now, I mean, anybody that's on social media has seen that kind of tribalism spread into everything. You know, like if you, everything with politics, everything with just every aspect of your life is now tribal somehow. This is weird. So I don't
And you're
know.
able
I
to
don't know what that.
entertain this like unique, your own belief system that's, you know, never challenged, never threatened, because you're in this little bubble and you never really get to grow in a way.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by it. Like I really am. It's like watching a slow train wreck. But I want to understand what's going on. But
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if I ever will.
Yeah.
But it's a weird thing. But I
Yeah.
think the yeah.
I
I
just
don't know if
figure
that
if
was. I don't know if that's what
if
you
you
wanted
pave a
to swear.
yeah, it's a train wreck. We're all gonna die. I just figure
Yeah.
if you try and paint, you know, for the 1 or 2% of people who do want a way that will lead them forward, you say, here are the key principles of nutrition. Here's what you actually need to put into your diet to move forward and get satiety and nutrients. Then we can keep on progressing forward and take it forward, like you said, not from zero to hero, but from where you're at now, just, you know, little steps
Yeah.
down the road
Well,
and
and
improve your nutrition.
I think like well, I like Ted's base model is really really good, really solid. And I think what you're doing is fantastic too because it gives you a way to just kind of gauge where you're at. You know, like you're as far as okay, well, I totally blowing it on these nutrients, so I should probably add a little bit of this or add a little bit of
Yeah,
that. So you can kind of over time refine your diet, personalize
yeah,
it.
yeah,
So I think that that's probably the way to go, to be honest. Or I
yeah,
hope things go more that direction.
yeah.
But it's really ultimately what you're doing is giving a feedback. It's an educational process, right? Because diet, like I said before, most people like they get hungry, they just eat. They
Yeah,
don't think about it. They would just find something that's tasty, and whether it's good for them or bad for them, it's kind of I don't know.
yeah,
So you're kind of over time training them what a healthy diet looks like just by giving
yeah,
them targets, and
yeah. And giving them the
it's
data about their own nutrition, and as they, all these people who think they're nutrition gurus come in and start looking at, oh, okay, I'm missing these three nutrients and what foods contain them, and you know, I'm not at the top of the leaderboard, but I've got a PhD in nutrition. I'm really triggered here. Let me, you know, do what I
yeah,
can to move along, and all of a sudden they've, you know, getting energy and satiety, and they're losing weight by just pursuing a high nutrient density, which is, you
yeah.
know, really cool. Gamification of nutrition.
That's a good way to put it, actually. And the gamification of nutrition, but what you're also doing, I mean, you're developing over time habits, like you're evolving their habits. So I mean, yeah, you follow what you're doing, do it for a solid year, and then intuitively your diet has changed.
Yeah.
Like you don't even really have to think about it. You're going to be eating way, way better
Yeah.
because you did the hard work and educated yourself over
Yeah.
that time span. It
But it's
works
the
out pretty good.
education through self-reflection rather than you know, one true diet from on high that everybody agrees with. It's like, okay, what am I eating now, and what do I need to eat a little bit more of? And those other not so optimal things fall off the list, and I'll just keep on, you know,
Yeah,
competing. And it's cool. It's cool how it works.
no, it's
The
good, but it requires accountability, personal
Yeah,
accountability. So, but if you're willing to go there, then it's very empowering.
yeah.
It's a good thing to do.
The no magic promised or involved. It's just, you know, getting the nutrients your body needs from food. But yeah, we've also tried to simplify it with recipe books, and not everybody wants to track their food, so it's like, here's some off the shelf. If you eat this, you'll be doing pretty well. Yeah, cool. Anything else you wanted to add to our chat? It's been great to get you online and get you out of from behind your iPad that you spend all your time. On Facebook.
I just want to say thanks for having me on. I mean, I apologize if I sounded a little rusty, but I admittedly am. But it was nice to be on here and nice to catch up. And I'm trying, as you've noticed, to get more involved again. And it's a bit like just dusting off the cobwebs. Even my little exchange I had with Dr. Feynman the other day was kind of like, I had to think about it. Like, oh, okay.
This is fun.
It comes back quick. So that's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, it's good. It's
anyway,
good you could bring all the problem solving thinking into, help us all join the dots a little bit more. And you've definitely been a big influence for a whole bunch of us to, get out of the dogmatic extreme camps and bring it into a practical application of all the biochem and nutrition and nutrient density.
I feel like I'm more successful on a writing medium, but that could be me. But I don't talk about it that much. That's why I write about a lot of stuff, so I can actually sit and ponder my thoughts and do it. But it's okay. It's fun.
It's been fun, man.
I appreciate it.
Thanks so much. It's been good to have you on, and we'll keep chatting online, and maybe another time we'll get you back on to have a bit more of a yak.
Maybe do another one after when I get myself sharp again.
Dust out the cobwebs. That'd be great.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mike.
Cool. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Man. See ya.
Have a good night.